Michelle has more than 25 years of experience in strategy HR consulting in the US, EU, and Asia. My first question to you, Michelle, is what is really a venture philanthropist organization and what is really a social enterprise?
Okay. Thank you, Corine, and thank you for having me here. So a venture philanthropy organization is basically an organization that supports social enterprises, not just with funding, but also with management support, and it's long-term support. So basically, when an organization exits an accelerator program, this is when a venture philanthropy comes and supports this organization. And we do this for periods of 4 to 5 years and with funding up to $500,000 in grants. But what's most important is this management support that we provide that also includes access to networks and impact management. And to answer your point about what is a social enterprise, it's related to impact measurement. So basically, a social enterprise is an organization that has both a business model that generates revenue, but also a social and environmental impact. And this social and environmental impact has to be measurable and scalable. So what we do as a venture philanthropy organization is we help organizations model their impact and measure it and have the right tools to collect the data and then to issue impact dashboards and be able to evaluate their impact and scale it over time.
Can you give us a couple of examples of KPIs?
Sure. So basically, one of the most important SDGs that Alfanar looks at is decent employment, SDG 8, decent employment for all. So one very important KPI that we look at is the number of jobs created. However, to differentiate between the number of jobs created that any organization creates and the ones that a social enterprise creates, the social enterprise is creating jobs for people who are living in vulnerable communities or who are disadvantaged, like women, youth, people with disabilities, small farmers in urban areas, etc. So there has to be a very specific criteria that differentiates from any other type of job created.
Thank you, Michelle. So we're going to move from do no harm or do intentionally good to our capitalist, right? Mark Smyth, CIO of Cedar Oxygen, with more than 25 years of experience in investment management, corporate lending, and supply chain finance. Mark, what is really Cedar Oxygen? Who are your main funders, and how big is your fund?
Okay, very direct questions. Very good. Okay, so Cedar Oxygen is meant to play a helpful role in Lebanon given the crisis because there's no bank. So we're one of the very few people who lend so-called fresh dollars to Lebanese industrialists. So this is a term that means nothing outside of Lebanon, fresh dollars, but they're in high demand, obviously, in the current situation. So we're really meant to fill in and do primarily trade finance or help Lebanese industrialists, including agribusinesses, to import raw materials so they can keep the factory running, keep their employees employed, make payroll, and do helpful things. So it's, to the capitalist point, yes, it's done on, let's say, commercial terms, but it's really meant to be an impact. I don't think there are very many people who would come for purely profit reasons into a country that's having such difficulty. So really, I mean, it's very reasonable terms. It's very much meant to help the situation and basically be a source for hard currency for people who need to buy raw materials.
So from a CIO to a CIO, I'm going to shoot you with some specific question.
Okay, sure.
So the name of the fund?
Well, it's fund is technically a little bit off. I mean, it's a
one word.
Cedar Oxygen.
Cedar Oxygen. Launch date?
Launch date. Well, we started doing our first transactions less than a year ago, so about 9 months.
Total assets under management?
We have a good pool of money, $175 million.
Average ticket size?
And even $1 million, so that's actually worthy of some follow-up. I mean, the idea here is we have a big tent approach. So we're here really to help not only large companies, medium-sized companies by global standard, medium-sized local standard, SMEs, and we're working very closely now to try to help what they call in the missing middle finance for even smaller companies.
If you get to choose the 3 selection criteria, what would be an ideal candidate for the $1 million fresh ticket fund?
Well, I mean, this gets to the secret sauce. There's really no special formula that we have. I mean, we lend on in a similar way that any commercial bank would lend. So, I mean, meaning that it's not concessionary lending. So, in other words, they need to be able to have the capacity to pay back. So, in the current environment, I mean, it's helpful to have, in the broadest terms, a sustainable business, something that's standalone. I mean, obviously, everybody's under hard times these days, but you know, there needs to be some way to secure the facility. So it's helpful, especially for agribusinesses, and I know this is a big theme of the conference, but to have at least some percentage of the sales be export-based, so there's fresh dollars in the mix. Other than that, tangible assets and sustainable cash flow.
Time to close an investment ticket.
As quick as we can. We aim to please. I mean, we could probably do it if we could get all the paperwork in a month. Usually about a month and a half, we can be in business.
How many previous closings?
We have about, last count, 32 industrial borrowers in
And
Lebanon.
in the pipeline?
76 last time I looked, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Back to you, Saad. So Saad is the country manager at IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. Saad is an expert in business strategy with a diversified pool of clients, including multinational corporations, government, and public agencies. As you see, that's a really big and special panel with big people, big titles, and deep pockets. So, you know, let's see what they're up to. Saad, given where you work, I have to start by asking you to describe the past 3 years in 5 words.
The past 3 years. In 5 words.
Yeah.
Let's say crisis is the first word. Resilience, being able to responding, and challenge, and lessons.
Another out-of-subject question. So on March 11, the whole Lebanese, I guess Lebanon as a whole, wake up reading the following. Lebanon Trade Ministry has banned the export of some locally produced foods. The export ban includes items such as processed food and vegetable, milled grain products, sugar, bread, and some type of alcohol. The ban also covered animal feed. My question to you is, was that a media scoop, corruption at its best, or none of the above?
Well, this is a very important and sensitive matter. Of course, if I understood your question, Corine,
what do we read from this article? What do we read from that, from this ban?
The thing is, you're asking what led to this ban, or what do we need from it?
Both.
Okay. Well,
why did they do it? Is it applied? Why are we seeing so many derogations? What is it really?
So look, I think it's a mix of a lot of reasons. One of which is Lebanon's geopolitical position, unfortunately, has been enduring a lot of shocks over the decades. So it puts Lebanon in a very precluded, geopolitical, sensitive position that sometimes has to deal with regional shocks. So I think this is not a field that we would follow at the development financial institution, but I think my own hunch is that these are politically driven decisions that put Lebanon in the center of some proxy situation that is very unfortunate. The question is, how resilient is Lebanon to this ban, I would say.
More seriously, so IFC is present today in this big event. So is there any specific interest for the IFC in the Agri-Food? And my question is why?
My answer is yes, smell the coffee, please. This is very important to IFC as a multilateral organization that focuses on providing a wide range of financial products and support and services to the private sector. But when it comes to agri-food and agribusiness, it's very, very key and central to IFC. What we're looking at is the ever increasing population around the world, reaching 9 billion people by 2050, this sector is going to have to feed 50% of that population. So where is that going to come from? And how do you go about extending support to this sector? For us as IFC, whether it's direct investments as part of corporate solutions that you're aware of, Corine, very well, or a small short-term working capital solution for financing, or a trade finance solution, or some on-lending through a fund that is specialized in providing certain instruments, or advisory services, or technical assistance. I said wide range of services that we can provide to establish that fundamental goal for making this sector part of the growth of economies that we work in. In the context of Lebanon, I think this is a very, very important sector in the sense that Lebanon now is at this fluid, very challenging stage that needs to put itself as part of a recovery mode and sort of restoration of confidence. Where agribusiness sits, as you can see, the vividness of this exhibition and the activities, the sector is evolving around Lebanon's competitive edge, which will always be there. Today, the reality is we're dealing with a very difficult financial situation with the fact that the economic powerhouse that used to exist in Lebanon, which is the banking sector, is no longer there. How do you funnel financing from the international community into this sector? What I think is very interesting is that this sector is evolving, and we're trying to find ways to establish financial instruments that would bypass this gap and establish new types of intermediaries, if you will, that could possibly be as part of what we call the non-banking financial community, including special funds, including special funds as well, but including other types of institutions. For that to happen, what the issue in Lebanon today is de-risking. And I'm sure you know very well that how do we go about minimizing the cost of investment in Lebanon because of Lebanon's geopolitical, unfortunate, fragile situation.
Yeah, we'll move to that. Yeah, okay. Michelle, your turn. So I hear you're raising a $50 million fund. So again, from a fund manager to another. Fund name?
Lift Ventures.
Launch date, expected launch date?
We're hoping Q2 this year.
Average ticket size?
Between 200,000 and 5 million.
Fresh or large?
Fresh.
Sector
It's a regional fund.
So other than the sector of focus that we know are impactful, what is specifically the selection criteria that you're looking at for SMEs for that specific fund?
Yeah. So we will be looking at growth stage organizations that have a measurable and scalable impact, either social or environmental, with a preference for social. Organizations that have a proven business model, and if they are in Lebanon, that can export. This is important as well. It's
expected time to close an investment.
So we are going to be taking a lot of time getting to know the organizations. We're also going to be taking quite some time getting to understand their impact, and especially understanding whether they are interested to measure and model that impact and scale it. Because we're not only going to be investing in social enterprises that already measure their impact. We want to encourage businesses with impact to start measuring that impact, because we want to grow the social impact sector. And the reason why it's so important and why we want to grow this sector is because globally, it's a $715 billion market, and less than 2% is coming to the MENA region, and even less to Lebanon. And the reason for that is because there aren't enough organizations that are measuring their impact and talking about it. And so impact investors overseas believe that it's not interesting to come to the region. So we really want to change that dynamic, and we want to attract these investors to the country. And the only way to do that is to take time to work with the organization. So the long answer short, at least 3 to 6 months. It's going to take a while.
All right. So in a nutshell, what we have now is an impact fund with an average of 250 to $500,000 in fresh dollar ticket, 500K, sorry.
To 5 million.
5 million average ticket, okay. And then we're talking about an equity or a loan investment.
So the instruments can be equity, loan, hybrid, but we're also looking at revenue sharing
All right.
instruments.
So you can get here an investment ticket in 3 to 6 months, while over here we can get an investment of up to $1 million in a maximum from 1 to 5 months. So in order, Mark, back to you, in order for a company to get a yes for financing, can you give us an idea about the due diligence process and more specifically the corporate governance within Cedar Oxygen?
Sure. I mean, the credit part is really, again, no different than it would be at a commercial bank anywhere in the world. So we just need your audit statements and all of the normal financial modeling. So there's no change. We are lending from a vehicle in Europe, so we have to get onboarded or know your customer, AML compliance, all of that needs to be done to a European standard. So sometimes that takes a little bit of extra time relative to, say, in better times, lending money from your local bank. So the KYC plus the credit policy, the credit process, again, maybe a month or so.
And how about the corporate governance internally? How many layers of approval?
Well, I mean, we're lean and mean, but of course, to get a file past the investment committee, there needs to be unanimous consent among the 4-member investment committee. So
it's a 2 layers approval, probably management, and then it goes to IC?
Yeah, management. We have what we call a pre-ICC, where we structure it, make sure it looks just right. There's many different checks we do with all of the various KYC AML. There's local, the CDR with the local debt obligations. I mean, there's a lot of heavy-duty credit work that goes into it, but by the time it gets to the final investment committee, as long as it's unanimous, should be the final step.
Given the type of the instrument, are you requesting any collateral?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the cliche would be bespoke. So, I mean, every situation is different. We're in a crisis environment, so we try to be creative, we try to be flexible, but, you know, there should be some level of collateral to help strengthen the credit. So that could be, let's say, a partial cash contribution on the behalf of the borrower, personal guarantee, corporate guarantee from a related entity somewhere, potentially, if it comes down to it, a real estate mortgage, but case by case, I would say.
For you, Michelle, how is the corporate governance internally within the fund?
It's very similar. We're going to have an investment committee, but before the investment committee, there's going to be a lot of pre-work that will be done. Yeah.
All right. And any collateral are expected?
It's really going to be case by case, but definitely there has to be something, yeah.
Saad, can companies come and apply directly to IFC? How does it really work?
You mean here in Lebanon?
Yeah.
Or okay. Of
Here
course.
in Lebanon, and specifically for those people, can anyone come and approach IFC for an investment ticket?
I think what's important is that, you know, IFC is a very, very sizable organization. And so for us on a case-to-case basis, depending on the ticket side, as an international organization, we like to crowd invest in funding. So if it's a small business that has some ticket size or a project that is, let's say in Lebanon, below $10 million, then we refer them to specialized funds like the one, for instance, depending on the sector, depending on the focus. In general, we do receive requests from companies directly for as long as it ticks all the boxes for IFC, which is why IFC, there's this additionality measure that we have to make sure that makes sense. Then we measure the impact that this project would create. Then we measure profitability. If these 3 elements meet to a certain level, then there is a role for IFC to play. Otherwise, we usually defer to intermediaries that have the capacity to offer that service. We're in the business of crowding in, not crowding out. But in the context of Lebanon today, we have to be realistic. It's not an easy situation because cost of funding in Lebanon is very high, and this is driven by the fact that there's a certain macroeconomical challenge that Lebanon is living through, which we all know of. So for us, for as long as we can minimize or nullify that risk, we're happy to talk to investors. And in fact, we are today, unlike all other DFIs, we are looking at a pipeline of investments that are out of Lebanon. The companies are in Lebanon. They operate in other markets, but for one reason or another, they are able to minimize the Lebanon country risk. Where for that to happen, this is like more of an immediate term, but we are looking at Lebanon's future and how Lebanon would kick off that recovery, as I mentioned earlier, and reconstruction of the economy and the restructuring of the financial sector, which is very crucial for us to be able to do business. That would be the stage that IFC could scale up a lot of activities in the country at all levels. Today, it's selective, it's opportunistic. Unfortunately, it's not part of a strategic approach because of the situation in the country.
Again, in the Lebanese context, would IFC invest in fund managers like the one around you,
Yes.
since you're not going to be going directly to those businesses?
When it comes to funds, you know this very well, Corine, we usually invest in funds that are regional rather than country focused. So in the context of the one that Michelle is running, we know them very well. We helped them set up the Lift ventures, and we're looking at the opportunity to invest within the fund. There are certain requirements that have to be met, including the reach, the pipeline, the fund manager experience, but also, is this a space that would provide that additional value that IFC can provide? But yes, we are open to business when it comes to funds.
So Michelle talks about 50 million, Mark talks 170 million. IFC would say an envelope of how big?
It depends, again, on the cases. So for
A
instance,
number, Saad.
you need a number. In general, we have a pipeline in Lebanon today of $170 million.
170. Here you go, Mark.
Bring it over.
So
Against all odds.
Yeah, so I guess what you see on this panel is really a mix of investors. I represent IM Ventures. I'm the CIO. We're as well proposing a convertible revenue loan fund for SMEs that are at a growth stage. So I think you see in front of you a diversified pool of investments that start with equity, to loan, to direct participation intermediaries, and for us is pure convertible. Thank you, panelists, and thanks everyone for attending.